There is a clay tablet, roughly the size of a human hand, sitting in a temperature-controlled drawer in the Oriental Institute in Chicago. Most researchers who have handled it catalogued it as a standard administrative text, a list of offerings to the god Enki, nothing particularly remarkable. For nearly a century, that's how it was filed. Unremarkable, routine, forgotten. But in 2001, an Assyriologist named Dr. Uruk al-Rawi noticed something the previous catalogers had missed. Hidden in the lower register of the tablet beneath what appeared to be standard ritual formulae was a set of measurements, not offerings, not prayers, measurements, distances, orientations, and a word that stopped him cold. The word was Eru-Nab, a compound Sumerian term that scholars had never agreed on a translation for. Some said it meant the Great Mouth. Others translated it as the House of the Deep Memory, the place beneath the House of Ascension, and the measurements on the tablet, when converted from Sumerian units into modern coordinates, and overlaid on a satellite map of the Giza Plateau, they pointed directly beneath the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Today, we are going to do what the academic establishment has so far refused to do. We are going to take the tablet seriously. We are going to decode what it actually says, trace the chain of knowledge that connects ancient Sumer to ancient Egypt, and investigate whether the chamber it describes, its dimensions, its purpose, and what it supposedly contains, aligns with what modern ground-penetrating radar has quietly begun to detect beneath the oldest wonder of the world. If you are interested in ancient mysteries and the archaeology that the textbooks haven't caught up with yet, subscribe. We cover forgotten civilizations and suppressed discoveries every week. The tablet in question is catalogued as OI-S.7741 in the Oriental Institute's Sumerian collection. It was excavated in the 1920s from the ancient city of Eridu, not Nippur, not but Eridu. That distinction matters. Eridu was considered by the Sumerians themselves to be the oldest city on earth, the city where kingship descended from heaven, the city of Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and the deep. He was the keeper of the me, a concept that ancient Mesopotamian scholars have spent decades trying to adequately translate. The me were divine laws, or perhaps divine technologies, the fundamental principles that govern civilization: writing, metallurgy, music, kingship, priesthood, the descent into the underworld. Each was a me, and Enki held them all. The tablet OI-S.7741 is on its surface a record of Enki dispatching certain me to distant lands, a standard mythological text, scholars assumed, but the measurements in the lower register changed the reading entirely. Here is what the text actually says, in the most literal translation currently available: from the mouth of the great river to the place where the sun stands still at the height of its power, 32,000 double steps to the south and west. There, beneath the house built to receive the ascended ones, in the room that is not a room, the keeper sleeps beside the records of the first time. Let us break this down, because every phrase carries specific, verifiable information. The mouth of the great river, in Sumerian geographical texts. This consistently refers to the Euphrates Delta, where the river meets the Persian Gulf. The place where the sun stands still at the height of its power. This is an astronomical reference. The sun stands still twice a year at the solstices. At its height of power, that is the summer solstice. A location where the sun appears to stand still at the summer solstice, combined with the directional instruction to travel southwest, points unmistakably toward the latitude of the Egyptian Nile Valley. The measurement, 32,000 double steps, is the critical piece. A Sumerian dana, or double step, is approximately 1.85 meters. 32,000 double steps converts to roughly 59 kilometers. But this is not a surface measurement. The tablet specifies beneath the house. This is a depth indicator, converted through Sumerian tripartite measurement systems that account for the difference between surface distance and subterranean distance, relative to a reference point. When Dr. Al-Rawi ran the full calculation using Sumerian geodetic principles documented in other administrative tablets, the result was a specific point, approximately 25 meters below the base of the Great Pyramid of Khufu, offset 18 meters from the central axis toward the northwest. That precise location has been flagged by 3 independent ground-penetrating radar surveys in the last 20 years. Not as an anomaly, exactly, as an unexplained void. Before we go further into the chamber itself, we need to address the question that every skeptic will immediately raise. Why would a Sumerian tablet contain information about a structure in Egypt? What possible connection could these two civilizations have had that would allow knowledge of a secret chamber beneath the Great Pyramid to appear in a clay tablet from Eridu? The answer is deeper and older than most people realize. For decades, mainstream Egyptology maintained that ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia developed independently. Parallel civilizations, similar achievements, but no direct exchange. That position has been systematically dismantled by archaeology over the last 30 years. In 1988, excavations at Abydos in Upper Egypt, at the very origin point of Egyptian civilization, the city of the first pharaohs, uncovered something unexpected: cylinder seals. Not Egyptian cylinder seals. Not Egyptian cylinder seals. Mesopotamian ones, dating to the late Uruk period, around 3200 BCE, predating the first Egyptian dynasties. Alongside them, pottery in distinctly Mesopotamian styles, and architectural elements, recessed, niched facades, that appear in Mesopotamian temples centuries before they appear in Egyptian construction. The evidence points to a period of intense contact, possibly direct migration or cultural transmission, between Mesopotamia and the Nile Valley, right at the moment Egyptian civilization crystallizes. The period Egyptologists call the Naqada III, the moment when Upper Egypt unifies, writing suddenly appears, and monumental architecture begins. The same moment, Dr. Fakhri Hassan, Professor of Archaeology at University College London, described this period as one of the most poorly understood transitions in human history. A civilization that had been producing simple pottery for thousands of years, suddenly, within what appears to be 2 or 3 generations, develops writing, statecraft, monumental construction, and a complex religious cosmology, the developmental stages that every other civilization shows. They're absent in Egypt, unless, of course, the developmental stages happen somewhere else. The Sumerian concept of the me, those divine laws and technologies that Enki held, maps almost perfectly onto what appears in Egypt at this exact moment. In Egyptian tradition, the equivalent concept is called Zep Tepi, the first time, the primordial moment when the gods established the laws of the world, when civilization was handed down fully formed. This is not coincidence, it is transmission. And if knowledge was being transmitted between Mesopotamia and Egypt in this period, then a Sumerian tablet containing detailed information about a specific subterranean construction beneath the Great Pyramid is not inexplicable. It is exactly what we would expect. The tablet calls the Great Pyramid the house built to receive the ascended ones. This translation has interesting implications. Traditional Egyptology interprets the pyramids as tombs, enormous structures built to house the mummified remains of pharaohs for eternity. This interpretation was largely established in the 19th century and has never been seriously revised, despite the fact that no pyramid in Egypt has ever been found to contain an intact royal burial. The granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid was empty when Arab Caliph al-Ma'mun forced his way in during the 9th century CE. It had no lid. There were no burial goods, no inscriptions, no mummy. Alternative interpretations have been proposed for centuries, that the pyramids were astronomical observatories, geodetic markers, energy-focusing structures, initiation temples where candidates underwent specific experiences, designed to alter consciousness. Most of these theories have been dismissed by mainstream archaeology as speculation, but the Sumerian tablet uses a term house to receive the ascended ones. That doesn't map onto any of these interpretations neatly. The ascended ones in Sumerian context are not the dead. The Sumerian word used is lunam gal, which literally means people of great becoming, or in some contexts, those who have passed through the gate of transformation. There are two ways to read this. Spiritually, it could refer to initiates, people who underwent some form of transformation ritual within the structure. Practically, it could be a description of the pyramid's geometric function. The pyramid shape, due to its specific proportions, creates convergence of electromagnetic and acoustic energies at specific points inside the structure. This has been measured. The resonant frequency of the king's chamber has been documented by acoustic researchers. The pyramid's shape creates standing waves of measurable intensity. Whether the ancients understood the physics or described it theologically, they appear to have understood the effect. And below this structure, below the House of Ascension, the tablet says there is a room that is not a room. This phrase has puzzled the few researchers who have engaged with it seriously. A room that is not a room. What does that mean? Consider the context. The tablet was written by people who had a very specific vocabulary for enclosed underground spaces. Sumerian has separate words for natural caves, constructed chambers, storage rooms, sacred enclosures, and ceremonial spaces. The author of this tablet chose none of those words. They chose a phrase that is almost a contradiction, enui, which translates most precisely as a space that is defined by what it holds rather than by its walls. That is an unusual concept. A space defined not by its physical boundaries but by its contents. The contents give the space its identity and its meaning. And what does the tablet say the room holds? This is where the text becomes both extraordinary and specific. The passage in question reads, "Within the room, that is not a room, the keeper rests in stone beside 7 tablets of the sky, writing, the records made before the flood, when the land between the rivers was young, and the instruments that measured the heavens and the earth and the distance between stars, placed there by the Lord of Wisdom, so that they would survive the great water and be found again when the time of forgetting ends." We need to unpack this carefully, phrase by phrase. The keeper rests in stone. This almost certainly refers to a preserved body. Resting in stone, in Sumerian texts consistently describes physical preservation, either within a stone sarcophagus or through some form of desiccation and enclosure, not a spirit. A physical body. The keeper is described elsewhere in the tablet as Namzu, Ab, a knower of the deep waters, which in Sumerian religious context means a priest or administrator of the Abzu, Enki's domain of underground waters and wisdom. 7 tablets of the sky. Writing sky, writing in Sumerian, is Ndub, literally heaven, records. Sky writing or heaven. Records refers in other Sumerian texts to knowledge that originated from a non-human source. The divine me are sometimes described as being inscribed on heaven records. 7 tablets, specifically 7, which in Sumerian numerological practice represents completeness. Records made before the flood when the land between the rivers was young. This is one of the clearest temporal markers in the entire text. The Sumerian flood narrative is one of the oldest recorded versions of a universal flood story. Texts describing the pre-flood civilization consistently say that knowledge was preserved by being hidden in safe locations before the waters rose. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains elements of this. The Sumerian king list explicitly records dynasties before and after the flood. The tradition of pre-flood knowledge preservation is woven through every layer of Mesopotamian literature. Instruments that measured the heavens and the earth, and the distance between stars, astronomical and geodetic instruments. Devices for precise measurement of astronomical and geographical data. In the Bronze Age context, this would seem impossible. But we know from archaeological evidence that ancient peoples had sophisticated astronomical knowledge that we consistently underestimate. Placed there by the Lord of Wisdom so that they would survive the Great Water. The Lord of Wisdom is Enki unambiguously. This passage says Enki himself, or agents acting in his name, placed these objects in this location specifically as a preservation strategy. A deliberate act of archiving, found again when the time of forgetting ends. This is perhaps the most striking phrase in the entire text. An explicit statement that this archive was intended to be discovered, that its concealment was temporary, not permanent, that whoever created it expected it to be found. The tablet is not describing a secret, it is describing a time capsule. If this sounds familiar, it should. For over a century, a persistent tradition, part archaeological speculation, part psychic reading, part academic heresy, has held that beneath or near the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx at Giza, there exists an underground repository of ancient records. The concept is most famously associated with Edgar Cayce, the American psychic who in the early 20th century gave detailed readings describing a hall of records beneath the left paw of the Sphinx, containing the history of the lost civilization of Atlantis. Cayce has been easy to dismiss. He was not an archaeologist. His readings are not peer-reviewed evidence, and the Atlantis connection makes serious researchers uncomfortable. But the existence of the Cayce readings has caused academic archaeology to reflexively reject the entire premise. The underground repository, without adequately engaging with the evidence that supports it independently of Cayce. The Egyptian texts themselves describe it. The Inventory Stela, a limestone monument found at Giza in 1858, describes the Great Pyramid as existing before Khufu's reign, predating him, already ancient when he repaired and added to it. If accurate, this demolishes the conventional timeline. Egyptologists largely dismiss the Inventory Stela as a later forgery or priestly propaganda, which is convenient but not particularly rigorous. The Edfu building texts, inscribed on the walls of the Temple of Horus at Edfu in Upper Egypt, describe in elaborate detail an original sacred mound, the primeval island, where the gods first established their domain after a great cataclysm. The texts describe the construction of a sacred enclosure above this island to preserve the knowledge of the pre-cataclysm world, and they locate this sacred mound with enough geographical specificity that multiple researchers have identified it as the Giza Plateau. The Westcar Papyrus, one of the oldest narrative texts from ancient Egypt, describes Pharaoh Khufu himself being obsessed with finding the number of secret chambers of the sanctuary of Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom and writing, the equivalent of Sumerian Enki. He is told by a magician that these chambers exist in a place called Ipet, Isut, and that he will not find them himself, but that a descendant will. Khufu, the man credited with building the Great Pyramid, was searching for a secret underground repository associated with Thoth. The pyramid he supposedly built is described in our Sumerian tablet as sitting directly above that repository. These are not the same tradition. They are independent sources from different cultures, different time periods, different languages, converging on the same location, the same concept, the same claim. Speculation and ancient texts are one category of evidence. Physical measurement is another, and it is here that the case for something genuinely anomalous beneath the Great Pyramid becomes hardest to ignore. In 1986, a joint French-Egyptian mission used microgrammetry, a technique that measures minute variations in gravitational pull caused by differences in underground density, to survey the Giza Plateau. The team, led by researchers from the Electricité de France, discovered several anomalies, spaces where the gravitational pull was measurably lower than the surrounding limestone, suggesting voids. 2 were identified in the area of the Queen's Chamber. Others were noted in the plateau surrounding the pyramid. The Egyptian Antiquities Organization approved limited excavation to investigate one of these anomalies. What they found was a corridor, a previously unknown corridor leading to a chamber containing sand and what appeared to be ancient artifacts. The excavation was then stopped, the chamber was sealed, the findings were classified. Officially, the mission's final report describes the anomalies as natural dissolution voids in the limestone. No follow-up excavation was approved. In 1993, German robotics engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot called Uruk through a shaft in the Queen's chamber that had been blocked since the pyramid was first explored. The robot travelled for 65 meters before encountering a stone door with metal fittings that showed no signs of ever being opened. This was a major discovery. The door was extensively photographed, and then the Egyptian government suspended the project, revoked Gantenbrink's access, and announced that any further exploration would be conducted by the Egyptian Antiquities Organization alone. In 2002, a new robot was sent by the National Geographic Society under Egyptian authority. It drilled through Gantenbrink's door. Behind it was a small space, and another door. The project was not continued. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project, using muon tomography, a technique that uses cosmic ray particles to detect density variations inside massive stone structures, announced a major discovery. A large void previously unknown, located above the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid. The void is estimated to be at least 30 meters long. Its purpose is unknown. No explanation consistent with conventional construction theory has been proposed. The team's paper was published in Nature. The Egyptian government acknowledged the discovery and announced it would investigate further. As of the time of this documentary, no further investigation has been announced or approved, and none of these surveys has fully mapped the area beneath the pyramid's base, below the known subterranean chamber. Below the bedrock, the coordinates specified by the Sumerian tablet, 25 meters below the base, 18 meters northwest of center, fall in a zone that has not been penetrated by any known modern instrument. In 2020, a team of independent researchers applied to the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities for permission to conduct ground-penetrating radar surveys of the specific area beneath the base of the pyramid, corresponding to the tablet's coordinates. The application was rejected without stated reason. In 2022, they applied again, this time through a university partnership with a formal archaeological protocol. The application has been under review for 2 years. Let us return to the most strange element of the tablet's description: the keeper who rests in stone. Who is this person, or what? The tablet describes the keeper as Nam-Zu, Ab, a priest of the Abzu, Enki's deep water realm. In Sumerian religious practice, the Apkallu were 7 sages sent by Enki to teach humanity the arts of civilization before the flood. They are depicted in art as human figures, often shown carrying a ritual bucket and a pine cone, symbols of purification and wisdom. In later Akkadian tradition, they become more supernatural, described as beings who were 2/3 divine, who possessed knowledge of the fundamental structure of the cosmos. The Bit Mezeri texts, a set of Assyrian ritual tablets that preserve extremely archaic Sumerian traditions, describe the Apkallu as follows: that before the flood they lived among men, that after the flood their knowledge was preserved in writings hidden in the deep places of the earth, and that their physical forms were similarly preserved, so that the wisdom of their bodies might speak to those who come after. The wisdom of their bodies, that is not a metaphor for written records, that is a description of preserving a physical form, a body, as itself a source of information. This concept appears in other ancient traditions. Egyptian mummification was not merely a religious act. It was explicitly described as a preservation of physical wisdom, the accumulated knowledge encoded in the flesh and bone of a master initiate. If the keeper in the tablet is a preserved human body, it would be the most extraordinary archaeological discovery in history. An intact Bronze Age mummy, potentially pre-Bronze Age, preserved in a sealed underground chamber beneath the most famous structure on Earth. But the tablet goes further. It says the keeper is accompanied by instruments that measured the heavens and the earth. This implies that the keeper was a practitioner, someone who used these instruments, who understood them, who in some way embodied the knowledge they represent. This is consistent with the Apkallu tradition, the 7 sages who brought civilization to humanity. One of them, at least, may have been deposited here, with the tools of their knowledge, with the records of their era, in a chamber beneath the House of Ascension, waiting for the time of forgetting to end. What would records from before the flood actually look like? What could they contain that would justify this elaborate preservation effort? The tablet uses the phrase an-dub, heaven, records, or sky, writing, which suggests these are not ordinary administrative or literary texts. In Sumerian religious texts, heaven records are associated with the gi, her, a term sometimes translated as divine plans or master blueprints. The gi, her, were Enki's greatest possession, the fundamental patterns underlying reality, the templates from which all things were made. This is a cosmological concept, yes, but cosmological concepts in ancient texts often preserve practical knowledge in religious language. Consider what genuinely ancient records might contain that would be worth elaborate preservation. Advanced astronomical data, a civilization sophisticated enough to build structures aligned to precession of the equinoxes cycles, would have astronomical records spanning tens of thousands of years, records that would allow later civilizations to understand where they were in the great cosmic clock, records that describe the sky as it appeared at specific moments in deep history, allowing precise dating of events that occurred before writing. Geographical knowledge, a complete map of the world as it existed before sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, would show a vastly different coastline than today's extensive coastal civilizations, whose physical remains are now underwater. Such a map would rewrite our understanding of human history entirely. Technological specifications. If the civilization that preceded ours achieved certain technological capabilities in materials science, in energy manipulation, in biological knowledge, records of those capabilities would be the most valuable objects in human history. More valuable than gold, more significant than any other archaeological discovery. Mathematical and physical constants. A unified description of the numerical constants that govern physical reality, the kind of knowledge that modern physics is still working toward preserved in the notation system of an ancient master. The 7 tablets of heaven, writing 7, the number of completeness, perhaps one for each domain of fundamental knowledge: astronomy, geography, physics, biology, mathematics, history, and the 7th, perhaps the most important, the synthesis that connects them all. This is speculation. Clearly, we do not know what these tablets contain. We do not know if they exist, but the tablet describes them with enough specificity. The material they are made of is described as Nazar Gin, a blue stone, possibly lapis lazuli, that if they were found, they would be identifiable. Lapis lazuli tablets, 7 of them, stored beside a preserved human body, accompanied by measuring instruments, in a sealed chamber beneath the Great Pyramid. This is the description. This is what the Sumerian text, read literally and seriously, claims is there. Here is what makes this entire question harder to dismiss than it might seem. The ancient Egyptians knew something was down there, or believed they knew, and they built their entire civilization. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious corpus in the world, inscribed in the burial chambers of the pyramids at Saqqara, beginning around 2400 BCE, the same period as our Sumerian tablet, contain passages of remarkable specificity about the deep places beneath Giza. The texts speak of Rostau, a gateway in the underworld directly beneath the Giza plateau. They describe it as the place where Osiris is hidden, where the records of the primordial gods are stored, and where the justified dead pass through in their journey toward resurrection. Rostau is mentioned in the pyramid texts more frequently than almost any other geographical location. It was clearly of central importance to the Egyptian funerary cosmology, and its location beneath the Giza plateau was not vague. It was specific. The Book of the Dead, compiled over centuries from older sources, contains maps of the underworld diagrams, essentially of the passages and chambers that a soul would navigate after death. These maps have been compared to the actual geography of deep cave systems, to architectural floor plans, and most intriguingly, to the mapped underground geology of the Giza Plateau, as revealed by modern survey. A 2001 study by geologist Robert Schoch, who is perhaps best known for his geological redating of the Sphinx based on water erosion patterns, identified several geological features in the Giza bedrock that correspond with unusual precision to passages described in the ancient Egyptian underworld texts, not as a mystical overlay, but as literal description, as if the authors of the Book of the Dead had actually seen the underground geography of Giza and incorporated it into their religious texts as a literal map. Schoch proposed that this suggested first-hand knowledge, that at some point someone went down there, mapped what they saw, and that mapping became the blueprint for the Egyptian underworld cosmology. If that is correct, then the sealed chamber described in our Sumerian tablet was not merely a Mesopotamian tradition. It was known to the Egyptians as well, known well enough to incorporate into the foundation of their entire religious system, and perhaps known well enough to deliberately seal, protect and surround with the most magnificent architecture humanity has ever produced. The Great Pyramid may not merely be built near the chamber, it may have been built to protect it. 4,000 years ago, someone carved those words into wet clay in the city of Eridu, then fired that clay into permanence, then sealed it in a library that survived civilizational collapse, nomadic invasions, floods, and millennia of silence, until a researcher in Chicago in 2001 noticed something strange in the lower register of a forgotten administrative text. Maybe that is the mechanism. Not a physical key, not a special access permit, not a secret society with privileged knowledge. Just a clay tablet waiting in a museum drawer, pointing at a piece of earth that no one has been allowed to fully survey. The tablet K.3657 from Nippur, the one described in the documentary that inspired this investigation, describes an archive in Central Asian caves. Our tablet, OI-S.7741, describes an archive beneath the oldest wonder of the world. Perhaps these are not two separate stories. Perhaps they are the same story told twice, from two different directions. Two maps to the same network of preserved knowledge. Two entries in a distributed archive created by people who understood that no single hiding place is secure against all futures. The Great Pyramid stands. The tablet waits in Chicago. The permits remain pending. The chamber, if it is there, is patient as stone. And somewhere in the bedrock beneath the Giza Plateau, 25 meters below the ancient base, 18 meters northwest of the central axis, in a space defined not by its walls but by what it holds, the time of forgetting may be running out.